Hello, and welcome back to another chapter of Small as an Elephant by Jennifer Richard Jacobson. In our last chapter, chapter 4, we read how Jack had gone to the lake with Aiden and Aiden's family, and he discovered that his cell phone had just been destroyed. He went swimming in the lake with it, right? So we're going to start on chapter 5. And here we go. 5. Due to the thick padding on their feet, elephants walk silently. Jack could tell that Aiden's parents knew something was wrong when he returned to the picnic. He tried to stay as close to the truth as possible, saying he was worried about his mom, her not feeling well and all. "What was I thinking?" said Aiden's mom, whose name Jack had learned during lunch was Diane. "I should have checked in on her, asked her if she needed anything." "Oh, that's okay," Jack said quickly. "It was just a migraine, I think." He had added that last bit, I think, because he didn't exactly know what a migraine was. But he'd seen commercials on TV, and it seemed like a sort of headache, but a really bad one. "Well, I'll definitely check on her when we bring you back," Diane said. "Great, Jack. Now what?" It was impossible to have fun for the rest of the afternoon. He hated being away from the campsite now that he didn't have a phone. What if his mother returned and he wasn't there? What if she tried to call? He doubted she'd been able to reason, to stay put, to wait patiently as he had. And then there was Diane's determination to check up on his mother. There was no way she'd keep his mom's disappearance a secret, no matter how hard he tried to convince her. She'd be just like the social workers and the guidance counselor and everyone else who thought they were helping when they were just making things worse. He thought the veins in his head were going to burst as Aiden and his mother walked him back to his campsite. "Huh? The car's gone," Jack announced as soon as they were inside of his tent, hoping he sounded genuinely surprised. "She must have gone to get more medicine. She said she would probably have to do that." "That's your tent?" Diane asked. Jack could hear the question in her voice. None of the other sites looked like his, just a little hubba tent and nothing else. "She got sick as soon as we arrived," said Jack. "We never even bothered to unpack anything." "You poor thing. Tell her that I'm making dinner tonight. I'll bring over soup and other good things." "Oh, that's okay." Jack suddenly felt as if he was on a speeding train, heading for a collision. "She'll probably bring us back some takeout." "Doesn't matter," Diane said. "Soup goes with everything. Tell her I'll be back to see what she needs." Okay. Even though he was getting used to lying, he couldn't figure out what to do next. "Do you want to hang out until your mom gets back?" asked Aiden. Diane smiled at Aiden. You could tell she thought he was doing the right thing. "Thanks," said Jack, "but I'm all good. I've got comics. I think I'll just read for a while." After they left, Jack crawled into his tent to think. What would he say when they returned? Maybe he could pretend that his mom had just disappeared. That wasn't a big deal, as her having been gone since when? Friday night? But what good would that do? There would be a big search. The story would be in the papers, just like that story about the missing girl. And he'd be taken from his mom for sure. Once, when he was about 7, he and his mother were down in the subway station waiting for the Forest Hills train to take them home. He was sitting on a bench, reading the advertisements on the wall across the tracks. His mom, who was wearing a lot of silly scarves, was bouncing around, talking to people in the station. When he glanced over, he saw her whispering something into a homeless woman's ear. The woman smiled, rocked on her heels, and shouted gibberish. "That's right," his mother had said. "You're absolutely right. Jack," she shouted, "come here." Her voice had grown more, gangly? Urgent? It was his mother's voice, but it wasn't his mother. At least, not the mother he loved best. He wanted to protect her, to pull her away from the strangers who had begun to watch her cautiously, and back to him. He'd gone over to her and, after a couple of attempts, caught one of her waving hands. "Mom," he said, "come tell me what this word on the sign means." She leaped out of his grasp. "Answer this riddle, Jack," she'd say, pulling a red scarf from around her waist and holding it up to the light. "What can burn in space?" "The sun," he said quickly, wanting to get this over with. "Oh, my smart, smart boy," she rubbed the top of his head. "That's because the sun is made up of oxygen. But can other things burn?" He tried to think of an answer. Then the homeless woman had reached out and grabbed his mother's scarf. Mom had snatched it back, laughed, and then bent down to wrap it around the woman's neck. "Burn, baby, burn," his mom had said. She danced around the station, demanding to know, "What can burn in space?" Lots of people just turned away and put their hands up as to say no matter what she was selling, as to say no to whatever she was selling. He'd followed her, trying to think. She might stop racing around if he could come up with the answer. "What can burn in space?" she called out. "A rocket," a tall, bald man had guessed, trying to play along. For some reason, that answer had made his mom frustrated. "Jack, help me," she said. "They won't listen," she said. He tried really hard to figure out what it was that she was thinking, wanting to show her he understood. "There was a song," she'd said, "a song about a fire. They didn't start the fire, but they had to put it out. And she wanted to tell people, warn them." He'd kept asking questions so she'd look straight at him. But she jumped away from Jack and began to pull on people's clothing to get them to pay attention. "Lady!" a man had yelled. "Mom, please," he had said, wrapping his arms around his mother's waist, trying to hold her in place. The Forest Hills train had pulled in. "Mom, look, our train's here." The doors had slid open, and Jack had put his hands on her back and tried to drive her into the train. But she turned so fast, knocking him to the ground. Soon after that, the police came. They took his mom to the hospital, and he went first to DSS and then to his grandmother's. Jack had heard of DSS. He knew they took kids away from bad mothers. What he didn't know until then was that his grandmother would try to take him too. She'd keep asking him questions, one after another. Mom had warned him about questions like this, told him not to answer them from anyone, not his teacher, or the social worker, or his grandmother, especially his grandmother. "She can be evil, Jack," his mother had said. And he had tried to keep quiet, tried not to say anything, but his grandmother wouldn't stop. "You talk too much," he finally shouted at her, and for a while, she seemed to stop. But still she was there, watching him, staring at him, thinking about the questions she wanted to ask. He could tell. Eventually, he'd found places in her big house where he could hide from her until finally they let his mom go and she came to get him. He couldn't let that happen again. Springing to a crouched position, he rolled up his sleeping bag and stuffed it into his backpack. He added the flashlight, 3 comic books, and the cheese. He tried to add the few items of clothing he brought along, but there was no way it could all fit. He couldn't carry the tent or the borrowed air mattress he'd slept on, and now he'd have to leave clothes as well. Should he wear shorts or jeans? Shorts would be easier to walk in, he decided. But he grabbed one long sleeve shirt and his windbreaker and tied them around his waist. Then he rushed to collapse the tent around the remaining belongings and dragged the bundle into the woods, where hopefully it wouldn't be found for days. He hesitated for a single moment, wishing more than anything that Mom would appear, would drive up and say, "Hey, Jackie, where you headed?" But it didn't happen. So he threw on his backpack and hustled down the road to catch the Island Explorer again. It's the end of chapter 5. Stay tuned for another chapter in another video.